Hello everyone, and welcome to this web series on unlocking the value of System Center and the Azure Pack. My name is Chris Van Wesep, and I have the pleasure of kicking off this series for you. I'm the Director of Worldwide Cloud Platform Marketing here at Microsoft. I've been with the company a little over 14 years, and specifically I look after our Windows Server, System Center, and Azure Pack technologies. As I mentioned, I'm kicking off the series today, and I've got an opportunity to spend the next 30 minutes overviewing our cloud platform vision at Microsoft. But then I'll be quickly followed by a number of other sessions. There's 7 more sessions diving deeper into System Center and Azure Pack. And these are delivered by our MVPs, or Most Valuable Professionals. Now, these folks are not Microsoft employees. They're professionals in the industry who have been working with us and with these technologies literally in some cases for decades. So we're extremely excited to have them here. These folks all come from the UK and Ireland, so they're local for all of you, and a wealth of knowledge that we're lucky to have. Each of them will have about 60 minutes for their session, so I encourage you to pay attention to all of those, and they're all available on demand as well. So with that, let's dive in and talk a little bit about the Microsoft Cloud Platform vision. As everybody knows, the concept of cloud computing is in all the headlines these days and front and center on most IT professionals' mind. But it's important to take a step back and make sure we're all clear on what people are really trying to solve for and why. In today's environment, business is simply moving faster than it ever has before. And one significant implication of this is the way that developers and line of business application owners are trying to respond more quickly to the needs of their customers. And this has given rise to this cloud computing phenomenon that we're seeing right now. People are looking for the resources they need to do the work that they need to do more quickly than ever before. They're also looking for scale, and when you hear about modern applications, this is one of the core tenets that lives within that name, and it's really about how quickly can I scale the applications based on the demand that they're seeing in the marketplace, and does my application have that capability inherently built into it? And then finally, economics. Well, I think most surveys that you would look at won't flag economics as the primary driver for a move to a cloud computing style. Everybody knows that there was huge amounts of cost savings involved in the virtualization of servers over the last decade, and the compute layer specifically. And there's a lot of intrigue in terms of how much better can I optimize my environment if I've really abstracted all of those physical resources, and I have the ability to distribute and then pull back resources based on utilization, and not have resources sitting idle for any significant period of time. So when I talk to customers, and regardless of whether they're going with Microsoft or with other vendors, I encourage them to think about a few key things when they think about their strategy as it pertains to cloud computing. The first one is to think hybrid. Virtually every enterprise customer that I talk to flags the note that they intend to have some of their assets in a public cloud environment, but for a lot of good reasons, they intend to have some of their assets in a private cloud environment or within their data centers. And this may be concerns relating to security or performance or reliability and availability. It may well have roots in data sovereignty issues and where they want their data to reside. But for the vast majority of enterprises, the notion of hybrid cloud computing is an important one for them. The second important thing is to focus on the services and not the servers. This is something that I encourage people to think long and hard about. It's a very different way of doing computing, data center and application computing than what people have traditionally done, where you're tightly binding applications to servers. In this model, The servers really don't matter as much anymore because they're much more commodity in nature, and the service is what matters, and architecting the service for the resiliency that you need is what matters. And then the last notion here is this question of where will you innovate? There's an amazing amount of investment going in by a number of large vendors into this cloud computing trend. And you as an individual company will want to be very thoughtful about where you'll take advantage of that prior investment and build on top of it, and where you may come in and want to redo some things that have already been done in the marketplace for whatever reasons those may be. So make sure you're thoughtful about where you're going to innovate in your cloud computing deployment. As we look back over the last decade or so in the data center, there's been a massive amount of value that's been driven to the business simply by the efficiencies of virtualization. And specifically, we're talking about compute virtualization, server virtualization. Everybody knows that there's been a ton of value to customers through this process, but most customers are getting to this place now where they've got 70, 80, 90% of their servers are virtualized, and they're realizing that there's a limited amount of incremental value that can be extracted from this process. Where most vendors are looking, and where a lot of customers are also now looking, is really in the application and services space for that next boost of innovation. This is why you'll see research that shows that the growth rate of investments in the app layer is about 4x what it's going to be in the infrastructure layer over the next several years. And you'll hear CIOs talking about this desire to get to an agile IT model. You'll hear about DevOps, and this really is about the agile application development. It's the same reason that so many developers are many times going around central IT because they can't get what they need from central IT fast enough, and so they go directly to public cloud providers. And this is this concept of shadow IT that people will talk about. And so these are the trends that are happening in the marketplace, and this is really all because people are getting laser focused on that application and services layer. And certainly as a large public cloud provider with Microsoft Azure, we see the value of presenting services to our customers for them to accomplish what they need. But for enterprises and central IT specifically, they too will want to put themselves in a position to offer appropriate services to their constituencies, so those constituencies don't feel the need to go outside of the company and go around some of the processes that they have in place within the organization. And so the ability to offer services in an appropriate way is also a large priority for central IT and enterprise organizations. Now, Microsoft has a fairly unique point of view on this notion of service delivery because we are one of the world's leading providers of public cloud services with Microsoft Azure. We currently have data centers around the world with 19 different availability zones, which is twice what Amazon has, and I believe about 5 times as many as Google has. So we've made a huge investment here on the order of $15 billion over the last 5 or 6 years. We obviously see it as a very strategic direction for the company. We've also invested in a number of partners through our CloudOS network, service provider partners, to also deploy Azure consistent technologies in their data centers so that customers get that fidelity of choice as to where they want to deploy their data center assets and applications, whether it's in their own data center, in a service provider's data center, or in Azure. As you can see, they have a multitude of choices in doing that. And on the notion of Azure, I think it's important to talk a bit more about this cloud computing model, because this really is the future of management as well, and will lend some insights into where we're heading with System Center as we go forward. And you'll notice I say the cloud computing model and not the cloud in terms of a place. Azure is a place, AWS is a place, Rackspace is a place, and those places all do cloud computing. But cloud computing is really a compute model, and it can be done in your data center as well. It's important to note that it's a very different way of doing compute, as we talked a little bit about earlier, than what most people are used to, and it's important to be very intentional in understanding the difference between this and the traditional way of doing things. When folks go to the Azure website, they're presented with a number of services that they can consume. This may be raw IaaS services, compute, network storage, etc. Maybe PaaS services that they would build upon, websites, databases, media services, Hadoop, etc. But what people don't spend a lot of time thinking about is the underlying infrastructure and processes that make these services available. And this is where a lot of the differences lie in the way that companies have traditionally done things versus the cloud computing model. For example, in Azure, if we have a server that's becoming non-performant, we don't spend any time troubleshooting that individual server. The value of doing that simply isn't there. Because the service has been designed to accommodate the failure of a server, you simply take that server offline, re-image the whole thing, and reinstall it into the service, and then load balance it again with that server. Again, this is a very different model than what most people are used to in the deployment of services and applications internally. But this is, when we think about cloud computing and we think about focusing on the service instead of the server, this is what we really mean. Now, for companies that want to do this in their data center, you of course have to think about both layers, the services as well as the infrastructure. Now with Microsoft, Azure Pack is the set of technologies that we use at the services layer. And at the infrastructure layer, we're talking about System Center, Windows Server, and Hyper-V. And if you haven't explored Azure Pack very much yet, you'll obviously get more information through this web series. But it's also very important for everyone to know that as far as our North Star in terms of how do we deliver Azure services and the ability to deploy Azure services in your data center to your constituencies, it's through the Azure Pack. So it's important to know that that's our strategic North Star as far as a set of technologies go. So if you haven't spent time exploring it yet, I would strongly encourage you to take a look at it. So when we think about having this hybrid deployment and using cloud technologies in your data center, there are a few things that I encourage people to think about, and this again is regardless of which vendor you go with. The first thing is to think about the sharing of code. How much code am I able to deploy in my data center that's also being deployed in a public cloud provider where it's being kind of tested and hardened at scale? At Microsoft, we make this a primary tenet of how we do things. We really are the only company out there that's in the business of both operating a leading public cloud environment, but then also sharing that code back into the technologies that you can deploy in your data center. For example, the hypervisor that runs Azure is Hyper-V. It's simply Hyper-V. It's the same hypervisor that you're able to deploy in your data center. It's not a special version for Azure. It's not a modified version. It's not something totally different. It's simply Hyper-V. And that's important for people to understand the level of consistency that we're driving there and the amount of stress testing that this hypervisor goes through, obviously, to deal with a worldwide set of services like Azure. And this extends farther. If you look at the Azure Pack today, many of the services that are deployable from within the Azure Pack, take for example the scalable PaaS website service or the service bus that's part of it. These are exactly the same sets of code that are deployed in Azure. Same code, same team develops it and deploys it in Azure and deploys it for Azure Pack. That's an important concept. the portal that you use in Azure Pack is the exact same bits that is the portal for Microsoft Azure. So a lot of sharing of code, and we're going to take this forward even farther with the next release of the products, where we will be taking further push into, say, examples of our software-defined networking investments, where you'll be able to take the network controller that we've created in Azure and have that as something you can deploy in your data center for managing your software-defined networking. You'll be able to take the virtualized network functions that we use in Azure, for example, software load balancers or firewalls, and deploy those inside your data center as well. So this concept of sharing of code is really important. The next thing I talk about is this concept of connected services. And this is something where most people have been grappling with this concept of, well, if I want to adopt cloud computing, what that means is I need to think of how much of my stuff is it appropriate for me to put in a public cloud environment. And that's kind of where their concept of cloud computing starts to end. But I ask for people to be more holistic in their thinking. Certainly, it may make sense to offload some of your on-premises resources into an outsourced environment, be that a public cloud or a local service provider. But you may also find yourself in a position where you want to leverage a service from a public cloud infrastructure against your on-premises environment. And there's a lot of logical reasons why you would want to do that in terms of, the amount of compute capacity or memory utilization and things like that that you can take advantage of in a public environment that you wouldn't want to necessarily pay for the infrastructure in your data center. Let's take a look at a few of those. Here we have examples of 4 different services that are in market today that you can leverage that are hybrid in nature. And the first one is this concept of reducing storage costs. This pertains to our Store Simple appliance. This is a company we acquired a few years ago and have been integrating since then. And it's effectively an appliance that you'll deploy in your data center where you ultimately tier the data that you point to it between hard disks and spinning disks for better utilization and speed of access on premises. But then there's also an algorithm in the appliance that will look at files that are used much less frequently and then shoot those off into the Azure public cloud environment for longer term storage retention. So a very simple concept that actually has major implications in terms of lowering storage costs. During my last trip to the UK in November, I sat with a CIO at dinner who told me that for the last 3 years, 2/3 of the information residing in their SAN hadn't been accessed once in those 3 years. And he was extremely frustrated that, he understood how much money he was paying for his storage solution, and it was not for what he deemed to be high value, high utilized data. And so finding a way to lower those costs was really important to him. And Store Simple is a way to do that in a hybrid fashion. The second is on identity management. Active Directory is, of course, the world's leading provider of authentication in enterprise organizations. But as more enterprises deploy mobile solutions in a mobile workforce, have companies accessing SaaS solutions, having a authentication service that is cloud-based as opposed to based in your data center became a bigger and bigger priority for folks. And so we created and deployed Azure Active Directory. And this has been a hugely popular service with folks. Currently, I believe we are authenticating about 40 million authentications per hour with this service. And so people have found huge value in being able to use a cloud-based service for authentication. The third one on here is Azure Operational Insights. This is a service that's actually in public preview right now. It's not yet GA'd, it will be soon. And this you can think of really as the evolution of our monitoring solutions. This solution is very interesting because it takes the log files from all of your servers and processes them in Azure and then presents them visually through a web UI through things that are called intelligence packs, where you get a very nice visual representation of a variety of different things, whether it's security information, malware assessments, configuration status, optimization of your SQL databases, etc. A number of different things, and this will eventually be opened up as a platform for partners to develop these intelligence packs for as well. You can also very quickly search through, what many times is millions and millions of log files, doing fairly easy to construct queries that allow you to drill down quickly to understand root causes of challenges that you may be having in your environment. The important thing here to understand is that this service is agnostic to servers. It can be used on Linux, it can be used on Windows. It doesn't care about the hypervisor that's underlying it. It candidly doesn't even care which cloud environment this is deployed in. It could be in Azure, it could be in AWS. It really doesn't matter. The service is something that is important to folks, and getting those insights is what really matters. So we're excited about this one coming out in the near future. And finally, we have one on business continuity, and this is referencing our Azure Site Recovery Service. This is one that's just gone public in the last few months, and it effectively is the ability to orchestrate the failover of services, not just servers, but the complete service, from one data center to another. And this can be between two physical locations that you manage, and in this situation, Azure simply acts as the orchestrator of that failover. The data doesn't actually flow through Azure itself, but Azure simply orchestrates the failover from one place to another. We've added functionality where if you don't want to be failing over between two physical locations, you can actually be failing over into Azure if you're so inclined. And we've recently added the ability to do this off of VMware environments and not just Hyper-V based environments. So people are pretty excited about that as well. Now, as you saw from the last slide, a few of those hybrid services I was calling out really are management functionalities, and that's an important concept to land here, because as we look forward and think about where we're heading and wanting to make investments in the management space, this concept of having services as extensions of on-prem solutions is really important to us. Our research tells us that most customers have challenges, deploying big, cumbersome on-premises solutions. They want something that's lightweight, easy to use, but still giving powerful insights and information. And that's where a lot of cloud-based services can come in handy. And you'll see here's examples of 4 that have already been deployed. Operational Insights, I told you, is not quite yet GA, but Azure Automation, Azure Backup, Site Recovery, and these are really functionally extensions of services and technologies that people can deploy in their own data center, but now thinking about it in terms of on-prem versus cloud service and the continuum between those two, and allowing people to make the choice as to where they want to invest for their solutions and which part they want to take advantage of and when. And so as we go forward, you'll certainly see more of these type of things, and I would encourage all of you to pay close attention to our Ignite conference coming up in May in Chicago, where we'll be certainly making more announcements and providing guidance on where we're heading in this space as well. So we talked about the sharing of code, and we talked about this concept of connected services. The last thing that I want to talk about is the concept of consistency between these environments. And this is important as well because, like I said, there are some services that you can deploy with the Azure Pack today that are identical, that literally are the same code as to what we deploy in Azure, things like the scalable website service. For other services, like the IaaS service, this actually is a consistent experience to the way that things are done today in Azure, but the underlying technologies vary a bit because you're using Virtual Machine Manager on premises, whereas you don't have that concept in Azure. It has its own fabric management. And this is important to think about because over the last 12 months, Microsoft's invested in over 350 features and technologies that we've deployed in Azure. Just a huge quantity of investments that we've made that customers can take advantage of. And so the important thing that I always want customers to think about, especially when they're thinking about their private cloud deployments, is how can I work with a company that allows me to take advantage of the investments that they're making so I don't have to reinvent the wheel, or I don't have to risk inconsistencies because different companies may have made different versions of a similar set of technologies. And that's where investing in a solution like Azure Pack in conjunction with Azure is something that really makes sense, because this is the way that you'll be able to take advantage of these services in your data center, even if you aren't using the public Microsoft Azure cloud infrastructure. So when you think about consistency, we encourage you to think on a variety of spectrums. The infrastructure as a service solutions, the PaaS solutions, and Microsoft's making significant investments in both of these places. You'll see that folks like AWS have focused more on the IaaS and less on the PaaS services. We really think that as people move more into modern applications and do refreshes of the environments that they have, PaaS services are going to be hugely important to them. So building out that investment early, and then allowing you to take advantage of that through Azure Pack. And then having a consistent interface. Like I said, the portal is exactly the same on both sides of things. And so investments in one place, you get the benefit of it in the other place. As we move forward with the next release of these technologies, you're going to see a huge increase in the consistency and the identical code that's deployed in one place versus the other. And so you can think of the implications for how quickly people will be able to take advantage of services deployed in the public cloud, and how fast they'll be able to leverage that in the private cloud as well. So really giving customers that choice and flexibility that they're looking for. I wanted to talk also about a few customers that are using the technologies that I'd encourage you to learn more about if you have the time. The first was Aston Martin, and they deployed our Azure Site Recovery solution, and this was to provide services between two of their data centers and provide a backup service between those data centers, where they're actually reducing their planned and unplanned downtime from what used to be days to now just a matter of hours in many cases, and sometimes less. So they're very excited about the deployment of that solution. Lufthansa Systems, not the airline proper, but the entity that services a number of airlines, is the second one here, and they used a couple of things. They first took advantage of our storage virtualization technologies, both the scale-out file server technology coupled with the storage spaces technology to lower their storage costs. Then they also leveraged the Azure Pack solution, where they had a need to be able to create a self-service environment for people to provision infrastructure services on an as-needed basis, and they found using the Azure Pack to be a great way of doing that. When we think about data center extensions and using the Azure public cloud more formally, a couple of good examples come to mind. The first is ABM, who was contracted to build out data center infrastructure at Heathrow, and they did not have a Northern European data center facility that they could use. And so instead of building a new data center facility, they actually leveraged Microsoft Azure for those services and deployed the solution that way, and was still able to manage it all through the Virtual Machine Manager infrastructure. So significant cost savings in terms of capital expenditure for ABM in that scenario. And the last one is EasyJet, who was going through a revamp of their website, which really is their mission critical tool in terms of customer reservations, and found that they were finding significant capacity constraints during peak periods where their website wasn't performing functionally as well as they needed it to. And so what they did is they actually created a small web application that was embedded in their broader application, and that smaller application was built in the Microsoft Azure cloud. And so now, by design, it has the scalability requirements that they need and can scale nearly infinitely based on demand. And so now they get the performance they need without having to have made all the investments in infrastructure just to accommodate those peak levels. So a lot of different examples of how people are taking advantage of our technologies in different ways to add value to their businesses. As we draw to a close, I wanted to underscore the places that we've been making investments and also being recognized in the industry by third-party analysts. Gartner is a good barometer for technical competencies and achievements by different companies, and it's worth noting that when you look at these four Magic Quadrants, x86 server virtualization, public cloud storage services, Cloud IaaS, and Enterprise App PaaS services, Microsoft's the only vendor in the world that is ranked as a leader in all four of these Magic Quadrants. You'll see a variety of different companies that are a leader in one or maybe two, but certainly not all four. And so we feel this really underscores the level of investment that we've been making in terms of where we think customers are looking for good solutions, and the validation that these solutions are doing good things, and we can service a lot of different needs for our customers. So this is what it really boils down to. It's having a vision for a consistent platform that really gives customers choice and flexibility. You want to provide the agility to your developers, but there's a certain level of control that you, Essential IT, needs to maintain to run the business properly. And so whether you choose to deploy application services in your data center with a partner service provider or in the Microsoft Azure cloud, that choice is really up to you. And our goal is to provide an environment that allows you that level of choice and flexibility when it comes to making those decisions. And that's what the Microsoft Cloud Platform is really all about. So as we wrap up this session, I also wanted to make sure to flag for you that we invite you to come to a half-day workshop where you can do a little bit more hands-on work with a lot of these technologies and go through Server 03 migration, talk more about Hyper-V, Windows Server, System Center, and Microsoft Azure through both verbal conversation as well as demos of the technologies. You'll see the registration link here below. And with that, I'd like to wrap up this first session. I'd like to say thank you again for the time, for listening and learning, and for hopefully spending time through the next 7 sessions as well with our MVPs. And also thank you for being a customer. We value it, and we want to keep working hard to keep you happy and have you find value in the solutions we create. So with that, I'll sign off and say thank you and have a good rest of the day. Bye now.